Yeah, just keep on talking. That means forever. That means forever. That means forever. That means forever.
Yeah. Walk up in this bitch like Sap I say. She over here talking about not boule. I'm so west, this should be my last name. Ay, I'm looking for a cutie, someone who won't betray. Yeah, and my love goes deep. If I say I love you, then this shit is what I mean. I see you getting wetter through your jock moose jeans. My forever is forever, can't let nothing go between. Diamonds in my ear, put your wifey in the trance. After we kick it, I'ma turn it to a fan. Can't respect a nigga if that's something he demand. I'm loyal to my niggas and I'm loyal to my fam. Y'all switching sides like Stacey Dash. Pride is the cost, you could price the tag. But for 45 minutes, I'ma get the bag. Finna be there for my sons like my name's Stephen Nash. Or Booker, this a light cook up. My bitch fine, yes sir, she'll look up. This catering mean that we don't need no DJ. Not a place for a face we done seen like C say. Forever like Andre say. Champagne and lemon with the Bombay, babe. French 75, but my French so frayed. Como tu tapel, show my bell, I'm staring at your eyes, but you staring at my lips. We talking about your mama, but you thinking about my dick. I catch on these nuances and assists. I told her get a grip, then she hit me with a grip.
In public.
She's so loud, she sounds so disgusting. We so loud, it sound like a discussion. I hit it with some rhythm, call it pussy percussion. Spank that ass, broke her back up in London. Hit it like Anderson, pack that pussy up, baby, I handle it. No matter if you with somebody new, you gon' think about me and I think about you too. Forever.
There we go. Hello, hello. Cheers, everyone, for being able to come and join us. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Mo, who's the head of Tokenomics for Anna Mocha Brands. Talk to us all about how you can be launching out your project, what it looks like to build out your tokenomics, and also a bit about your story. You know, I think we're curious to be able to hear a little bit about where you've been, your kind of like journey that you've been into, and where you kind of see the space moving forward. And we've got like these like tactical advice to be able to go through as well. Everyone here at Build Station will get some one-on-one time afterwards as we have our little tokenomics roast. We've got other experts there as well. We've got PK from Gunner Cook, Alex for Simplicity, and Maddie from Legion.cc. So you get that one-on-one advice here. And so if you're not here in person, or you need to make sure you're building for Colosseum, and you can come join us at Build Station next time. This is for like the top builders. So we've had our application window open for a while. So if you didn't make it, don't worry, there'll be another one later on. And this is a chance for our best builders to get the support that they need. So let's just go into a little bit about it. But Mo, do you want to tell us a bit about your story and a bit of intro about yourself first?
Absolutely. GM, everyone. Again, great to be here, and it's great to see just how Solana, under your tutelage in the UK, is helping grow the ecosystem as well. So again, big shout out to you, big shout out to everyone part of Super Team UK.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so my story, where do I start? Probably university is a good place to start. I studied mathematics at university. I know, boring for some. It was exciting for me. Went into finance, quit in my second week, realized this is not for me. When you got managers sniffing coke in the toilet at lunchtime, it does not send the right impression.
Nah, you need a run.
Yeah, and I was like, in my second week, no, this isn't for me. Went back, did my master's in mathematics, and then did a master's in education and actually trained to become a high school teacher.
Oh, very cool.
So, yeah, so
actually, I didn't know that.
Did you not?
No,
Interesting.
I didn't know that. That's quite fun.
Yeah, so it's like my route into crypto was quite different from people coming from the finance background or the tech background or the legal background. Mine was more around problem solving. I was sent the Bitcoin white paper in 2017. I'd heard of Bitcoin before, but it was always in the context of you can use this to buy drugs and it's untraceable. It's like at the time, I was like, listen, I can just like WhatsApp my dealer. It's good and get a bit of weed. Oh shit, this is live streamed. Oops, never mind. No, but all jokes aside, it's like that was my context of Bitcoin until I was sent the white paper. And being a mathematician, when I read it, it blew my mind. It's like this solves what was shown to us as the Byzantine generals problem.
Yep.
And it's just like, all right, great. Let me buy some Bitcoin. And sort of delving deeper into the world, this is maybe mid 2017, I discovered ICOs. It's like, wait, I can put in £50 and it just turned into a few £100. Let me put in 500, let me put in 1,000. And then very quickly I was using Bitcoin and Ethereum to on-ramp into shitcoins. And sort of rode that wave all the way up. And I had my strategy, it was working. And in December time, I got too excited, let's say. I let go of my fundamental beliefs and just turned into, I think it was like a Lambo boy or a moon boy at the time.
Full degenerate mode.
Full degenerate mode. And by May, my portfolios would be 97% down.
You learn in the trenches.
You do learn in the trenches. And it was at that point, it's just like, I was recently married at the time.
Yeah.
And the kid on the way. It's my mortgage money.
College
It's
fund
gone.
doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, damn, that's my life savings gone. Why? Like being a problem solver, being a teacher, you always thought to reflect. You always want to find out why.
Yes.
Outside of the rugs in the space, outside of the bad actors in the space, what I realized that there were true builders in the space where on the equity side, there was still value being accrued, but the token was down 97, 98%. And that sort of led me down to this rabbit hole of, well, there's this thing called tokenomics that might make sense for Bitcoin. That might make sense for layer ones, but it didn't make sense for anything on an application layer, so to speak. And for me, that was a problem that needed solving. Yeah. So through 2018 up until DeFi summer in 2020, it was more around how can I be advising, even before advising projects, what can I do to learn more? And I realized, well, there wasn't much content out there. So it was more the case of reading, hypothesizing, and then just trying to come up with solutions. And then through doing that and being active in the London scene and slowly growing my network. And again, your network is your net worth. Like I cannot emphasize that enough. And maybe for those listening in, honestly and truly, if you do not ask, you do not get. So it's very important to reach out to people on Twitter, on Instagram, or just on any social media. If you see someone at an event, go up to them, speak to them. Most of us don't bite. We sometimes we're super busy, fair play, but we don't bite. But sort of back to the story, it started advising projects and sort of refined my craft over that time. Yeah. And then in 21, Animoca Brands reached out, and I'd seen Animoca Brands. I'd known them. It's like, are they a VC? Are they a gaming company? I wasn't 100% sure, but I knew they dabbled in both. Yep. Went through the interview process, and I was offered the opportunity to come in and found the tokenomics department there. Fast forward to 4 years, like I've been lucky enough to work on projects such as ApeCoin, Mochaverse, Open Campus, Pixels, to name a few. We've launched different tokens on multiple different chains, Solana being one, Ethereum, amongst many others. And sort of over that process, and sort of to summarize, failure is key, because we're in a space where there is no blueprint. So if you're going to fail, you have to fail very fast, but you can also learn from other people's failures in addition to trying to innovate. So if you are out there and what you're doing isn't working, that's absolutely fine. Just try to see it through, or try to reach out to people who may have a bit more experience. And then you can, again, fail fast, iterate, grow, and take it from there. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Like it's something where like I like what you talk about, like you don't ask, you don't get. You know, like I have like a funny story about one of my nieces. When we were going off on like our holiday caravan parks, she would go up to like the hot dog stands and she would always ask, can I get a free hot dog? And then my mum would always, you don't ask, you don't get. You know, she never got a hot dog, but you never know. You know, you don't ask if you don't get. And it's like those sort of things when, like, especially at like events and everything's all going on, you know, you make sure you're getting out there asking for that key advice, you know, making sure that you're able to soak in all the information as you can whenever you get the opportunity to speak to somebody like that.
100%, absolutely.
And then like to talk a little bit about like the going deep into the tokenomics side. You know, what is then your step-by-step process? You know, when you first, like, you hear about a project, you're like, okay, cool, you're doing X, whatever it is. You know, where do you start when you want to like build, I want to like know a token should be part of this, but how do I go for that process of figuring out what best fits?
It's a very interesting question because it really then depends on the founder's understanding of Web3 and the ecosystem. And I've been lucky or unlucky to work with founders across the spectrum. And it really does make a difference because a lot of it, if they're more on the Web2 side, there's a lot of education around, to your point, why do we even need a token? And in most instances, if we're being completely honest, you don't. They use it as a fundraising mechanism. Correct. And we sort of saw that with the ICO boom across 2017 and 2018. Over 21, we saw all of NFTs, but fundamentally they're digital assets being sold to raise funds. Like when we're thinking of tokenomics, and maybe this is a line from Shrekonomics. And how many of us in the room have seen Shrek? Okay, a few of us. How many of us have seen the line when he's like an ogre is like an onion? There are many different layers to it. Tokenomics is exactly the same. It's like an onion. It's multidimensional. There are so many different layers to it. So coming back to your question, and back to sort of my intro in terms of tokenomics was broken in 2017, 2018. Back then, we didn't have distribution schedule. We may even have not had a pie chart, which is just like, right, these are my allocations. We've come such a long way since then. So if we're speaking about the most forward layer that people see, it's, well, in most instances, there's a finite amount of tokens. There are instances where there is an infinite amount, or they're it's an open-ended amount based on supply and demand, but in general, it's like it's 1 billion tokens, it's 3 billion tokens, or in Bitcoin's case, it's 21 million tokens. There's a finite amount, and then there's a distribution or the initial distribution of those tokens and the initial allocation of those tokens. So that's maybe the most fundamental layer.
So the total supply and then the distribution.
The distribution, the vesting schedules associated to that's one layer of tokenomics. Another layer after that is more the case of when we're thinking, maybe to double down on the distribution side, is Bitcoin was revolutionary in its sense that it was the very first cryptocurrency, but also from a distribution standpoint, it's the miners are mining, but every 4 years that mining reward is being halved. And that forces Bitcoin to be deflationary over time, which in theory and what we've seen practically actually is that the price does increase over a period of 4 years. Normally there's a 1 year lag to that. So we've sort of seen that cyclical approach. One of maybe the challenges in the space is we like things to be simplified. And what we see with most vesting schedules, they're linear, which just means I'm going to unlock tokens at this month, or there'll be a cliff, which means the tokens are locked up for a certain period of time. And then every month I'm going to get some tokens unlocked. But growth very rarely is linear. So what you tend to see is a misalignment between the vesting schedules and between the actual growth. And what we also see from a price action perspective, the price will have really big increases during a bull market and not during a bear market, regardless of what the underlying product is doing, which sort of leads me to the next layer, which is the utility or the product aspect. What we've seen more often than not are projects launching tokens first and then trying to find a product to find product market fit, which isn't necessarily an issue. And I'll go through examples of why that isn't. But in a traditional sense, you tend to launch product first, you find PMF, and then you look at different monetization options. In crypto, we've flipped it on its head and let's launch a token. And a big part of the reason what we've seen with digital assets, so when I say tokens, it's interchangeable between fungible tokens and NFTs, as well as the main two asset classes within tokenization as of now, is this essence of a community. And we tend to see this more with meme coins or with NFTs, that by going the digital asset first, you're able to build your community base. Now, community is super powerful because we're moving away from Web 2 or traditional aspects where the end point is a consumer, which is someone who's just, again, consuming something, and then you're monetizing on their consumption, where they're able to come in and actually be an ecosystem builder. And when we think
level of ownership in what you're being able to build,
100%,
part of that journey.
100%. And I think that's super important because what we're seeing today is ownership which is another layer as well. And when we're thinking about the ownership layer, it's something in Web3 you understand. And it's sort of like there's a mental transition that happens when you're sort of more traditional Web2 focus coming into Web3, understanding that what ownership actually means. Because the majority of people in Web2 do not understand what it means to own your own data. And the best example, and we'll do a little thought exercise in the room, how many of us a few years back remember when when Facebook brought out WhatsApp? Quick show of hands. How many of us thought our data is not going to be safe? How many of us downloaded maybe Telegram or Signal to circumvent? How many of us are still using WhatsApp? And I think, and for those of you listening in, everyone who put their hand up for saying, okay, like we weren't happy with Facebook buying out WhatsApp, is still using WhatsApp today. And myself included within that. Why? And that's network effects. Because I'm not going to move to a new platform or a new ecosystem if I'm the only one there or there's a small group of us there, which is why platforms like Signal, for example, haven't seen adoption, even though they're fully encrypted. And you can argue WhatsApp now is at a place where there is that encryption, there is that level of safety, but back then that wasn't the case. And while there was that initial migration to Signal, everyone defaulted back to Telegram or to WhatsApp because that's where the majority or critical mass was. So I think that aspect of network effects becomes super important because by going the digital asset route first, you can start to grow your community base, which is also your user base, which is also your consumers, which is also your marketing or your top of funnel marketing approach. Because if I own a digital asset, if it's an NFT or a token, I'm talking to people about it. This is the asset that I have. This is what I can do. And maybe a great example of that, maybe DeFi Summer with Curve, and I think it was YFI as well, was one of the very first. And then in 21 with Axie or with Bored Ape, sort of being the blue chip of the for the NFTs, everyone wanted access to that. And it was more the case where, well, some of these assets were not desirable at below an ETH or at an ETH, but once it hits 10 ETH and 20 ETH, that's when it becomes more desirable. Yet the underlying asset hasn't changed from a value proposition perspective. So the network effects then becomes another layer. And another layer after that is value. And I feel this is a very important aspect, because when we think of value, especially in this space, we think of it as financial value. But if we take it from a philosophical perspective, and there's a French philosopher at Bordeaux, there's 4 different types of value. Economic value being the main type, but there's also, I always forget one of them, so hopefully I don't forget any of them. So you have economic value, you have symbolic value. So when we speak about having a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk or a Milady, that's having that symbolic value. There's also the value around community. And what is the 4th one? We'll come back at that. We'll come back to that one. But it's the idea is that there are different motivations for us to hold an asset. If it's in Web 2 or in Web 3, and then now you can start to see all of these different layers interacting together. So back to the question, if a founder's thinking about, well, what does my token economy look like? Well, more often than not, they're fundraising first. And what we've seen become general consensus in the space is, well, I'll fundraise on equity and there'll be some form of token warrant. The reason for that is investors want some safety. What we've seen is a lot of investors invest on tokens and then the token dies quite quickly, which we'll get into later on as to why that is the case. So what you don't want to be doing is selling too many tokens, even through an equity investment over token warrant, because what we've seen is retail have wisened up. Maybe in 21, hype could carry a token value, but in today's day and age, we've seen Pengu, we've seen Anime, so from notable NFT collections in Pudgy and Azuki, drop tokens, and what's happened? There's been no hype that's carried the token price up. There's been, in Anime's case, it was brutal. It was a straight dump because there was no value in the token outside of the economic value, like we spoke about. And in Pengu's case, it was in slightly better market conditions. There were liquid funds buying in, so you saw the price increasing. But as soon as that sort of fresh capital coming in stopped, and we started to enter this mini bear market that we're in, we saw it drop from $4, $5, $6 billion market cap to $400-500 million market cap. So most of these tokens are down quite bad. I'll pause there because I feel like I've gone on for quite a bit.
Yeah, but like we're talking about like those different layers. Yeah. So it starts with knowing like the number of tokens and distribution of then those tokens. Then we're going down into, well, now you like what is then that distribution? So you're like expanding on, okay, what is the vesting schedules? You've got the different investors from different sides. So then that all matters into it. Then you're going into the network or the utility of it as like how it's being used, how does it fit into it? Then it goes into then those network effects. So then how does then that fit across the whole ecosystem? And then it then goes into the ultimate value. And then that's what predicates like you move outwards, you know, like I think an interesting place, you know, like, so we was talking about earlier on in one of our talks about product and how to design product. You know, Simon Sinek's like start with the why and then work your way out. It's almost like the value is the why, right? That's where it kind of like begins with, you know, when you talk about those different mechanisms for the value, like where are you seeing at the moment most tokens having their value? You know, where are they being used? Is it that it's like stuff in like a deep in product, that token is what's enabling network to be able to run and distributing rewards out to people? And on the other end of the spectrum, you have your community coins that are just like their value is that I'm part of that mission, I'm being a part of whatever that is. Like where are you seeing the value part of these tokens? And from your experience, what does that look like?
I think Bitcoin's a great place to start because the consensus around Bitcoin, it's either a store of value or it's digital gold or both. So that's the value proposition with Bitcoin, even though it was meant to be initially, in terms of Satoshi's dream, it was meant to be a currency that created trust in a trustless environment. But we've seen the evolution of what the general consensus around, well, what does Bitcoin actually stand for? And then for Ethereum, you can argue it's the programmable internet, if you like, with the smart contract functionality. With Solana, which is super interesting because of the speed and the scalability that Solana has, what we saw was actually it becoming a casino, if you like, in terms of the meme coins launching on there. And we sort of saw the rise of Solana after the last bear market from $8, especially after FTX, to hitting over $200, was really fueled by the speculative nature. So there was a consensus that if you want to speculate, Solana is the chain to speculate on, even though the Solana is so much more than that. But that's the general consensus. Why? And I think I'll just take a small detour. That's because the majority of people in the space, unfortunately, have lent into the speculation aspect. And I say that having experienced that myself in 2017, where it's like I'm investing on fundamentals, and then it's just like, well, I've 2x here, I have 5x there. Let me try and put everything else and get that 10x, and then put it in somewhere else and get another 10x, that you forget about the fundamentals, and it's more the case about ROI, and it turns into pure speculation. So I feel that there's an underlying issue with how the space or how the thought processes in the space are. And I want to have a go at exchanges, because I feel exchanges are a big problem in the space as well. Because when you get a project wants to list, and exchanges are quite, these are the different metrics you have to hit. You need 100,000 followers on Twitter. You need 100,000 people in Discord. So what do the different projects do? We're going to do some kind of, exactly, we're going to do farming.
Yeah.
So they farm, they hit the different metrics.
And that's like they launch their tokens, you know, it's airdrop campaigns. It's like, it's the same people going around being able to get like they're not taking the onion, they're not like thinking of the value. It's just like, it's a funding mechanism. And part of my funding mechanism is getting it out there and listed on the exchange. And so then I need to like hit these metrics. So just saying is like, in order to then get it onto the exchange, then I'm designing my product and my token launch strategy around getting it listed, rather than it like adding value and like fitting into then that whole economy of like how my product is working and making sure it fits into the incentives are aligned from my user side and my investor side to ensure that everything can then run smoothly.
100%. And sort of bringing it back to the distribution, we spoke about the investor side of things, or the community side of things are very important, because more often than not, what we're seeing is these tokens are reward tokens. Even though there's utility baked in, people buying the different digital assets are not buying it for the utility per se. They're buying it more so for ROI. I'm going to come and buy at this price point, and then it's going to 10x or it's going to 5x. And then I've got this mental model of when I'm going to cash out.
Yeah. And it's almost sometimes like a share in that company, almost, where it's like, I'm going to buy the Jupe token because I believe Jupiter will do well in the future. No idea where it all fits into it, but it's that speculation of like, oh, I believe in this in the future, that it's going to have some sort of support. Like, well, where do you work with them projects on really being able to properly define out and understand, okay, but this is why people are buying it, beyond just that like speculation in my product and my token doing well? Like, where do you find that either the utility side, how it fits into the products? Like, we talk about designing those token economies.
So we look at different personas within an ecosystem, which is your user types or archetypes, if you like. One type is the speculators, like we've said, they're unfortunately the majority, so it makes it hard to predict what's going to happen. But other user types, again, if we're talking about Jupe, it might be someone who's providing liquidity. That could be a user type, and someone else could be a trader. That's another user type. And then you sort of break down who your different initial personas are, and you try and find out where can we create a value chain that has a positive cyclical effect between the different stakeholders. And the stakeholder could be like the foundation of its treasury. That's a stakeholder within that ecosystem as well. Most of it breaks down because of the majority of the community members of the users coming in do not fit into the personas we want them to fit into. They fit into the speculative layer. And the speculative layer is important because that's where the liquidity provision comes in outside of market makers. That's where people are buying and selling, which is what you want. And that also brings in other user or persona types in terms of people running arbitrage bots and so on and so forth, which gives higher volume. But the majority, again, of people are looking for ROI. So it might be the case of, okay, I believe in Jupe as an ecosystem, or I believe in Ape as an ecosystem, or I believe in Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana as an ecosystem, because of the Lindy effect is super important as well. And for those not familiar with the Lindy effect, it's just the case of, it's a function over time. If something's existed for a longer period of time and it's settled in, like it has mind share, there's a higher chance of success. So we see that as well. And what we've also seen is so many tokens being launched. Like, I forget the number on Pump Fun, for example, millions of tokens being launched, and we haven't really grown the underlying user base in crypto that much. Like, retail has been, in my opinion, has been the same. When we can look at the number of wallets, but with a bot you can spin up 10,000 new wallets in an instant. And as users in the space, we all have multiple wallets on the same chain and then multiple wallets on different chains as well. So you're likely to have a magnitude lower of users versus the number of wallets that are out there. And I think that's a problem. Why? Because of attention. And fundamentally, what crypto is, it's tokenized attention. And when I say tokenized attention, it's the attention a project has is reflected in the price.
Because like
as well.
The one big thing we talk about is the idea of the internet capital markets, and like the companies, they're going public on the internet. You know, and then so when you're talking about that like attention that they're getting, you know, it's like a stock on the exchange. You know, it's like the predicated price of that is based on the demand and attention that company is getting, and the fundamentals that happen, but then it's the speculation on people what think they're going to happen, the perception of what is actually happening that drives them wanting to get in and to be able to grow it out. And so when you're then thinking, so with all of that understanding of like, okay, cool, I know that when the token does get launched, the survival of it or like the action of it over time is predicated on that attention and demand that we're getting. and I have a level of control at the start because I'm deciding what the quantity is, I'm deciding what the distribution schedule is. How are you then looking at that, like just the pie chart of like the percentages and breakdowns? Where do you start when, as like a team, you're kind of designing that and figuring out, okay, cool, what is then the first step for us in design that we need to be able to take into account for this?
I mean, one aspect is like the initial split, and we look at it as insiders and community. Insiders are your investors, is the team, our advisors, and the community could be for your airdrop campaign, could be for future rewards, etc., etc. And what we try and do is weight more tokens on the community side versus on the insider. Why? Signaling is very important, and in some instances, I mean, Ethereum, with their initial supply when they launched, it was 80% to investors and only 20% were there for rewards for the miners, given it was proof of work back when it launched. That is very hard for that to happen in today's day and age, unless it's at the protocol or at the chain level. But more often than not, there needs to be signaling that the majority of the tokens here are for the community. And if there is a big enough percentage, and that's relative, for some it's 20, for some it's 30, 40% given to team, to advisors, to investors, there needs to be a long enough lockup on that to be sending the right signals. Because again, retailers wisened up. No one wants to be exit liquidity for anyone else. But then, so when we're thinking about that pie chart, as long as there's a healthy enough balance and there's a good storyline around why this is the case, and we have these amount of tokens for the insiders that are locked up for a longer period of time, it's then how can we, once we have that initial attention, how can we retain community members, how can we retain users? Because what we were just saying a couple of minutes ago, there's so much dilution out there, there's so much other shiny new things coming out. How can I keep attention on mine? And that's where, for me, the airdrop becomes super important. And we've seen airdrops done wrong for so long. I mean, like on average, 80% of people who receive an airdrop sell. Now, if you're seeding your economy with, or your ecosystem with your users, where you want some kind of longevity or some kind of lifetime value around your community members, where you're providing value, but they're also providing value. And again, having that positive feedback loop grows the value of that ecosystem overall. We're not seeing that because the majority of people that are engaging are value extractors. Like we were saying, there's a lot of airdrop farmers that are out there, people who are botting the different quests that are there. And when it comes up to the initial distribution, you really want to be giving value to those who will continue to provide value. What we've seen, like one of the biggest airdrops, one of the first biggest airdrops was Uniswap, where the condition was simple. You had to have interacted with the protocol at least once, even if it was a failed transaction. And there was equality, if you like. Everyone got 400 uni, regardless of I've done millions of dollars worth of volume or I had a single failed transaction. What happened? The majority of people sold. But what we also saw post that with Uniswap was that, okay, that this is a governance token, but there was no governance. There was also no utility. I couldn't use Uniswap to get a decrease on fees, for example. And what happened with the Unis token? It pumped for a bit because back then speculation was great. People would buy in even if there was no,
because there's a share in that company of, I think Uniswap's going to do well.
This is it. And there was only one Uniswap. You had your sushi swaps and your 1 inch and your 400 other knockoffs that came afterwards. But at the time they were the first to market. But fast forward to today, where there's tokens launching, NFT collections are doing token airdrops every other day. What does that retention look like? And that really comes down to your airdrop mechanism. What we're seeing is people saying, all right, we're going to give 10, 20, 30% of our token supply to our community off the cuff, but with no retention mechanism. So it's, I claim my tokens and I'm free to do as I want. And if I'm free to do as I want, sort of that decision tree becomes, I've claimed, then it's either hold or sell, which becomes a very big issue. And one of the things we've advised to one of our internal projects, Mochaverse, was actually the airdrop design. And I think it's very important to go into this because I feel this is just as important as in terms of what does that community breakdown look like, what does the insider percentage look like. When we're thinking around airdrop, if you get your airdrop wrong, it's very hard to recover. And again, I've mentioned a few tokens. There are so many tokens out there where the chart looks like that. They start over high FDV, low float, and it dies. And in reality, if anyone new coming in and they look at a chart like that, it's like, okay, well, it's down 99%, so there's so much upside, but every other chart in the industry is down 99% from all-time high. So how can we prevent that? And it's that initial distribution of value. So with Mochaverse, as an example, we gave users 2 options. So it was an airdrop to the NFT holders, and you can either choose claim now or claim later. And if I was claiming my tokens now, I actually got less tokens overall initially I got less tokens over the long term than someone who claimed later. But it very quickly showed us who's in this, who's a farmer, who's in it just to make money, again, from that persona profiling, and who's a true community member who's in it for the long run.
Just a quick one on that. As like we made that split, was it that you just straight said, I just made up numbers, like you get 10 tokens if you claim it now and 30 tokens if you claim it in a year? Or was it that, okay, everyone, you get 10 tokens now and you could stake it and then you'll earn appreciate, and then by the end of the year you'll then have 30 tokens.
So staking is the next part. So you've preempted. So the first aspect is the user journey and sort of that decision tree. Am I claiming now? Am I claiming later? Cool. For those that claim now, that's great. But because we know how much they're claiming now, or we know what the worst case scenario is, if everyone were to claim now, you can circumvent that. Because again, you're controlling the initial distribution of these tokens.
Yes.
For those who claim later, they got some tokens up front as well.
Yeah.
But they had the rest of their tokens, if you like, vested over a period of time. But what we did and what I found out was quite interesting is if we treated it like everyone was getting 100% regardless of which route you took, we taxed the people who, this wasn't the way it was sold, but this was the underlying mechanism, that if I claim now, I was only, let's say, getting 70% of the tokens I should have got. Now that 30% difference was put into a pool that was then distributed to everyone else.
Yeah.
So that's where the extra rewards were coming from. It was coming from those who would claim now, versus having to take an extra allocation from your pie chart, so to speak.
And what did you learn from that in terms of like how many people then did claim or like claim now, and so you then had spare funds left to distribute?
I think there was a number of different learnings. We assumed, again, depending on who you spoke to, some people assumed more people would claim now to sell and then buy back when the token was lower. But what we also did when we launched the token is try to launch it at a lower price point so there can be price appreciation versus having a higher market cap at launch and then having the downside. The reason for that is those claiming now, we know they're going to sell. So why give them more value for their buck by launching at a higher price point? Let's launch at a lower price point. Let's get them out, and then we can start to grow. And that's why with the Mochaverse chart, you don't see that bang. It's more the case of, and it's quite a healthy chart. It's a much healthier chart. And then after that, the staking. Now, staking is super interesting because when we think about staking, it's a case of APY or APR. I stake my tokens for a period of time and I'm getting more tokens in return. Now, that kind of staking is great in the midterm or short to midterm if you're locking tokens up, so you're decreasing sell pressure, knowing there's more sell pressure coming at a future point in time. But it gives you time to build a product, if you're not product oriented, that hopefully by the time the staking unlocks, there's genuine use cases. But what we've also seen, coming back to the point that everyone's a speculator, as soon as these staking unlocks begin to happen, people are already hedging and they're starting to sell, knowing there's going to be a dump. So even if they believe in the ecosystem, I'll sell now, and then when it dumps, I get to buy back more. We knew that was an issue. So it wasn't your standard stake from that perspective. For those not familiar with Mochaverse, and I think let's take a minute to explain it because the next part will make sense. Mochaverse or Animoca Brands. How many of us are familiar with Animoca in the room? Okay, a few of us. Animoca Brands, earlier when I said when I joined the company, was it a VC? Was it a gaming company? It's actually an ecosystem builder. And on the investment side, we have over 600 portfolio companies. What does that mean? It means there is a large number of projects that want to launch tokens. We also have a large number of tokens on our balance sheet as well. And how does this impact staking? Coming back to Mochaverse, it's when I'm staking my tokens, I'm earning staking power. Now, what am I using my staking power for? Because this is the incentive for people to lock up, or as their NFTs, for those who have claimed later, begin to unlock tokens. What can I do with these tokens? Why should I claim and then lock them up again versus claim and then sell? Well, the more I'm staking, the more staking power I'm getting, which is then giving me access to free token drops from partner projects that are coming in. Now, that's great on the Mochaverse side, but why would someone want to partner with Mochaverse if I'm then going to airdrop my tokens to a user base that's likely going to sell? But then that's the trick. They're unlikely to sell because they've already proven once that they've chosen the option to hold. So now we have some kind of reputation system that's beginning to build. And we've had 4 or 5 drops so far. And in the majority of cases, or in all cases, over 50%, I think the average is like 67, 68%. People have actually held the tokens that have been dropped to them. So you're staking the Mocha tokens alongside the NFTs. You're earning staking power. You're burning staking power. So then you get a choice in terms of what projects do I want to get into. I'm burning staking power to then get access to partner tokens. And some of these partner tokens who have had staking capabilities, that's where we've seen a higher amount of people hold the tokens and then go and stake within that ecosystem because they're the right kind of persona that we want to include versus those who have decided to dump. Now, those who sold early, we actually saw a few of them came and brought back because they realized, right, we made the mistake. There's much more value in holding this token. So they're actually buying back at a loss, which is very rare.
And it's a very good signal.
And it's a very good signal. So that's, and then that sort of gives you what does that user journey look like and how's that reflected in the price chart. So Mochaverse, I'd advise people to go and study what we did with the staking there, what we did, with the initial airdrop with the staking mechanics to continue providing value to the underlying users because that's your retention mechanism versus just a naked stake being again API focused.
And so it's very interesting to think about when you are launching out that token, how do you get rid of the people who would just like speculate and immediately dump onto it and building your mechanics in such a way that they get out first. And then you were saying before, like you get out at a lower price in then your launch. So then the people who do then stay, they then get to ride with you. And when then you're looking at, okay, what other mechanisms can I build into that? The idea of I'm not just staking for an APY, but it's like almost more reputation-esque in the sense that it's designed in a way not to reward you, but to prove to us you should be rewarded. And getting a different type of mechanism that's then distributed out to them in order to then be able to retain them and why they want to keep that like stake in the case because they know that they're getting additional rewards. And is there like mechanisms where like the longer you have them being keeping your tokens there, the more rewards that then you're receiving over time, not from an APY point of view, but as you're saying from Mochaverse side, these like drops that then are coming in. So you're receiving these like splashes of value rather than like you're just like swimming in it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the reputation. You need data points to build reputation. Yes. So the data points you have is like the 4 or 5 token airdrops as of now. So the other thing when you think about a token economy and your tokenomics, it's not the initial tokenomics that you go with for the rest of the project life cycle. It's quite the opposite. It's you have to iterate. It's your tokenomics is your monetary policy, so to speak. And no country has a monetary policy that is static. It has to be dynamic. Excuse me. So then that's the idea is, and Curve Finance is a great example of that because we've seen iterations in Curves and in Curve token economy. Ethereum is another one where we've seen we go from proof of work to proof of stake and become either inflationary or deflationary, just depending on the usage of Ethereum as well. So these are examples of iterations in a token ecosystem.
And then, so if we talk about that for a second, is that then a misdemeanor that when I first launch like that pie chart and where everything's all split up, I have to stick with that for the forever of the token? Is it that the things you can be able to adjust things over time? Solutions.
So it comes down to what's being promised. And if in your initial pie chart, your initial allocations, that's a promise to everyone coming into the ecosystem. It's a promise to your investors. It's a promise to your advisors, to the team, to the community members. And so when we look at the community bucket, because you don't know how the product is going to evolve over time, what you don't want to say is we're giving 10% staking rewards. Because what if you need more? What if you need less? You've now made a commitment for staking rewards. So we try and call that like an ecosystem or ecosystem growth bucket. Why? It gives you that flexibility to change how people are being rewarded over time versus just, okay, 10% staking, we're now tied in, depending on what that vesting for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, that we need to give that out over time. The investor side is slightly different. And what we've seen with some projects that maybe if the token hasn't hit the values that are required for investors to unlock, we tend to see investors, they want ROI. I mean, that's why most are investing. They want the project to be a success, great, but they want ROI as well. But if it's at the detriment of the project, we've seen founders go back to investors and say, what we'll do is we're going to increase the vesting schedule for a period of time, or we'll increase the cliff for a period of time to give us enough time to find that product market fit so the value can continue increasing. And so when you unlock, it's not to the detriment of the project, because what you don't want is a token unlock happening to investors, them dumping the token and there's not enough liquidity there or the market cap isn't high enough, and then bang, your token's down 20-30% in one day. That's like the first domino. And then retail sees that, they're like, sugar, the investors are unlocking, we need to start dumping our tokens, and then it creates a very negative spiral from a price action perspective.
Yeah. And I guess one point there before, I'm curious of like any community questions as well that you guys may be able to have. When you think about like these sophisticated investors where they can see it. So we'll take an example like the staking unlocks or like investor unlocks happening, and they know at this point there's likely to be more sell pressure. How would you balance them selling early in that speculation, and then with our idea of like, oh, I'm going to sell and then buy back early? Is this a healthy mechanism that you see? Like, what ways can you see teams can protect themselves when their tokens are live, and that way they can be able to make sure that they're making the right strategic decisions?
It's a tough one for a number of reasons. Market conditions are very important as well. So Sand token is a great example where their vesting was happen every 6 months. And what we've seen is, in general, bigger unlocks. We tend to have a larger amount of supply coming into circulation. But what we saw with Sandbox is the initial few unlocks happened during the bull market in 21. So actually that was priced in.
Yes.
So even though investors were selling, there was so much demand. Again, economics is basic supply and demand. There was enough demand on the token to absorb that sell pressure. So we didn't see a correlation between unlocks and sell pressure. But in general, that there is that correlation there. So one aspect could be, again, then becomes chain specific. If you're able to unlock tokens block by block, now that's very expensive, or historically it was very expensive on Ethereum, but that's something you can do quite cheap on Solana or on like a range of layer 2s and layer 3s. Now, why does that become important? Because it's you randomize the points at which people are selling. So in likelihood, you're not going to get, or it's highly unlikely that everyone's going to pick a moment in time to sell their unlocked tokens. I might sell after a week of them unlocking. You might want to hold for a month because you want to stake it, or you want to hit a certain point where the dollar value is relative to an amount you want to be able to cash out. Now, because that's different, it brings in a stochastic process of randomization. Stochastic just means it's unpredictable from that perspective. So if you can have your vesting schedule done on like a daily or a block by block basis, that makes it great, because again, that's that randomness in terms of people selling. What you don't want is a big chunk of your tokens unlocking at once. That's one side of it, and the market conditions play a very important role. The other side is, well, we spoke about linear vesting, and we said, well, linear vesting isn't tied to growth because growth is non-linear. It's how can we have vesting schedules actually tied to the growth of the token from a price action perspective? Because it might be that the token launches and there's so much volume being traded that it makes sense to unlock investors early, because at least for the investors that want to sell, you can sell down the token based on the amount of volume that's there, and there's very little drawdown on the price. So that's something that we're running a lot of simulations on just to see what that would look like, because we've seen there's been a lot of innovations in the space, but around vesting schedules, airdrops, things like this has been little to no innovation. So that's really where we're focused in terms of how can we get those marginal gains to improve the likelihood of success for a project over time. So that aspect of dynamic vesting becomes super important as well.
Yes. Oh, okay, very interesting. Well, does anyone have any questions they would want to be able to give?
There are no bad questions. And I was a teacher, so how good are you at catching? Okay, cool.
I was so ready to dodge as well. Yeah, I wanted to thank you very much, by the way. I think it's been a very insightful talk. It's plain to see all of the experience, man. It's good to see you, after a few years as well.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how do you decide the amount of token supply to allocate to market makers? And when you're having those conversations, how do you ensure that they're not going to have a very negative impact on the chart?
I think great question. So I'm going to answer another question first before answering that one, because in most instances there's a fixed supply of tokens, and more often than not we've seen an industry standard of like 1 billion tokens being used. Fundamentally, when you're pricing the tokens, and which will lead into the question you've asked, it's more a case of psychology. And it's the majority of people can deal up to 2 decimal places from a dollar value up until like the tens, hundreds, thousands. That's what we're used to dealing with in a day-to-day basis. So when you look at meme coins on one end of the spectrum, that I can own hundreds of millions or billions of a coin and it's only worth like $100, that's very hard to comprehend. And then Bitcoin on the other side, where I own a fraction of a whole, I own hundreds of dollars worth of an asset, is very hard to understand as well. Because again, when I speak to my normie friends and it's like, you should buy Bitcoin, like, but it's too late. It's at 70K, it's at 80K, it's at 90K. It's like, no, you're not buying a whole Bitcoin. You can buy 0.000001 of a Bitcoin. And they're like, huh? And that's the psychology aspect. But then leading on to your question, how much to allocate to market makers, it's a challenging one, because then the exchanges you're launching on plays a part. If you're launching on a big exchange like Binance, OKX, Coinbase, where you know there's even Upbit in Korea as well, where you know there's a large amount of volume, you do want to unlock more tokens for market makers. If you're launching on a DEX, it might be a fair launch, and fair launches aren't that fair, but that's maybe a discussion for another day. You might put all of that liquidity into one-sided liquidity pool for people to buy in. So I think the method the token is launching has an impact on what that looks like. Also, the kind of deals the market makers give, the structure is slightly different. Some of them, you loan them the token and then there's a strike price. In other aspects, there's some kind of revenue share based on the market making that's happening. So that's very important as well to understand the impacts. And there's pros and cons to each. So it's more the case of, well, what's, depending on what the product is, depending on the interest from exchanges, depending on how I'm going for a DEX first approach, like we were speaking about, maybe launch at a lower price point and then grow that price point over time. If you have a strong community, you might launch on a DEX first, grow the price, and then go to exchanges and say, well, listen, we have volume, we have price appreciation. You can list us because we can bring a bunch of users to your exchange. And the reason why that isn't a bad way to go, even though there are pitfalls within that, is listing on exchanges is very expensive. The amount of projects that we've worked with that have done their raise, we've done the tokenomics, we've helped on the go-to-market, and then they're like, all right, we need another $1 million to $2 million. We need to go to do like a bridge round or some kind of raise to raise $1 to $2 million to pay for exchanges, to put the security deposits down. That's money that you're taking out of your community members' hands that you could be putting into a liquidity pool, for example, that you're paying to exchanges. And coming back to, I think maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, about like exchanges for me are part of the problem in the space. They're going to ask for advisory tokens, and again, what do they do more often than not? They're the first to dump. At least we've seen that more recently. So it's a double-edged sword. So I know I've taken on a slightly different tangent, but there's DEX first approach, exchange first approach, pros and cons to both. What you want to do is make sure you understand, if you are signing an agreement with a market maker, what does it mean? Like if it's a strike option, make sure that the strike options are at price points that make sense. Especially if you're launching at a lower valuation and the strike point is, let's say, 125% from that price point. That means they're able to sell your token, and now they have ownership because they're buying it off you at not a discount, but a discount to the future market value of that, or the potential of where that's going. So these are things, or if it's, rev share makes more sense, but some market makers don't operate on a rev share. They'll operate, again, they have their business model that they want to make sure they monetize. Some market makers might dump on you as well. So if you're going for more than one exchange, you might want more than one market maker because it hedges you by having more than one. So there's a number, that's a headache within itself as well. I hope I've answered your question. Absolutely. A good question as well.
What's up, guys?
How you doing?
Awesome insights. One question is about, what is the best use case of a token that you've seen around? Have you got like an interesting case study that we could look into later?
The best use case of a token is probably as a gas fee. So like for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, a number of projects, or I think the whole space realized that maybe 2 years ago. So every project then all of a sudden became an L1 or an L2. So they can add a zero to their valuation and raise more. In reality, while on paper that's a great use case, and from a legal perspective, again, this is not legal advice, but from a legal perspective, it gives the token outright utility because it's a gas fee. But for you to be able to monetize on that and create value within an ecosystem, you need a large amount of transactions going through. And we're seeing Ethereum has actually become inflationary because you can argue, even though it has a high volume of transactions, they've become too good in all of the upgrades that they've done over the amount of layer 2s and layer 3s. So even when an ecosystem as big as Ethereum, which is second in market cap only to Bitcoin, is struggling with that, given the volume of transactions they have. Solana slightly different, Bitcoin slightly different. So that's a use case. Memes, I think, are super interesting. Like 99.9% of meme coins die within the first 24 hours. And by die, I mean they have less than 10K liquidity left. But because you have a community, and you can look at Doge, you can look at Shiba Inu, you can look at Floki, you can look at a number of these meme coins that haven't died, is because there's an underlying community that believe in that meme. That's it. zero utility, zero use case. It's not a gas token. It's a meme coin around the meme. And then now you have like two ends of the spectrum. So it becomes very difficult to say, well, what's that killer use case? Because it really then depends on what's the underlying product and how big is your community and what does growth look like as well.
Yeah, I get that. And just leading that question, do you think rev share is a good use case? Have you seen it worked before in other projects?
I think it's a great use case, but I also think as soon as you're distributing revenue, that you fall under being a security, and it's more the case of the legal side that becomes a challenge. There are creative solutions around that. So we are core contributors to an education protocol called Open Campus, and sort of what seeded the idea of Open Campus was. All right, take a step back so it can make more sense. We being Animoca Brands, we acquired an educational technology company a few years back called TinyTap. What TinyTap does, it allows teachers to create gamified content using a no-code solution. Schools and parents pay a subscription fee, and then there's a revenue share based on how many times a game or a course has been played. That's Web 2, nothing to do with Web 3. Once we acquired it, it's like, all right, what can we tokenize here? And what we realized was that some of these games, if you like, some of these courses had a much higher market cap in terms of the revenue being attributed to them. But to your point, how can we do a revenue share without it being a security? And then the answer, we looked into music to find the answer, and it's this notion of co-publishing. So instead of me being an investor coming in, I'm going to be a co-publisher. What I'm buying is 80% of the future revenues that are being generated, but I'm not buying it as an investor. So it means it's not passive income for me. I have to co-market this content as well. We did the proof of concept in November and December 2022. We sold 6 NFTs in November, 6 NFTs, or we call publisher NFTs in November, 6 publisher NFTs in December. We raised over $400,000. So bear in mind, this is the height of the bear market back then. 50% of that went to teachers. So you had an elementary school teacher in the US walking away with like just under $37,000. That was more than her yearly salary. So that was a great proof of concept and a great way to allow investors to come in with a different hat. So again, it's not passive income. I'm now having to publish this content or just help on the marketing of this content for that not to be an underlying security. And we had all of the legal agreements from the UK, from the US, from Hong Kong, from the different regulators saying, we do not believe this is security because of X, Y, and Z. But that route is very expensive as well. So I think that there's always a catch-22. I've seen projects from one guy, Australian guy, Roland, amazing guy, had an amazing project, Minfo, stands for more info. And it was using sound, so to speak, that if I'm in a mall, for example, there's a sound bite that will come through. The app would pick it up and it would let you know what's happening in the store. So I might like to shop at Uniqlo. So I'm outside Uniqlo and it gives me all the information on the discounts and things like that. He went down the legal path. Let me make sure I get the legal sign off. The project still hasn't launched and he's run out of funds because what you're fundamentally doing if you're trying to create something new and you're paying lawyers, you're paying them to learn. That's it, because there's no blueprint around this stuff. So you have to be careful taking the legal route. But again, it's difficult. It's not easy. Because if you grow too big, what we've seen maybe up until a year and a half, about a year ago, is the SEC will come after you. Like the SEC was filing against everyone. If it was OpenSea, if it was Dapper, if it was Yuga, so on and so forth. A lot of these have been dropped as of now, but yeah, we're not clear yet. Even though Trump, I think net is positive for the industry, but the Trump effect is priced in, and we've sort of seen that so far.
Yeah, we just got to wait a little bit and hope for the best.
Keep waiting, keep growing the community. In the meantime, I think where we are today, there's loads of examples of how not to do things, but there's also some good examples of how to do things. It's just the good examples sometimes are not front and center. We tend to focus more on the scammy stuff in the space versus versus the strong people who are building strong product and different monetization models.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, good questions.
Hi. Is there any scope of tokenomics in the medical field?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Is there any scope of tokenomics in medical field? So actually, I'm building a medical kind of stuff. So I thought of having like a modality, like utility model for tokens, so just to reward the patients in case of sharing their anonymous data. So how is it like? How is the scope and how is the legal side?
So I definitely think there is, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's around, well, the underlying asset is data, and then it depends how much someone is willing to pay for that data, and then that's where we can use things like zero knowledge proof. So me as someone sharing my data, sharing my medical stuff, I'm happy to give away my age, my gender, if I have any underlying conditions, my height, my weight, but I don't want to give away my name, I don't want to give away my address, and I'm being compensated for that. So for me, that's a great way to do it, and it's not revenue sharing per se. It's I'm selling access to my data in a democratized fashion. That works. The issue we're seeing in the space right now is, who are we selling these solutions to? We're selling them to speculators. Now, in more often than not, speculators don't want 10 pence or 10 cents every time someone calls on one of their to gather some data. They want to make $100. They want to make $1,000. Fuck, they want to make $100,000 if they can. So it's finding product market fit, not necessarily in Web3, but more so in Web2, where it comes back to what I was saying maybe towards the beginning, this idea of having critical mass, network effects, education as well. And I gave the example of WhatsApp, that a lot of us use WhatsApp, even though we know our data isn't safe, but we use it because everyone else uses WhatsApp. Even though us as an industry, we know that there's violation in our data there, but we still use platforms like that. Now imagine the normal person has no idea that their data is being farmed against them or used against them. And we've seen things like Cambridge Analytica. So this isn't me hypothesizing or making things up. These were actual instances where our data was used against us to swing elections one way or another way. As a humanity, I'd say we do not understand the value of our data as of yet. And I think that's a big issue as to why we haven't, or part of the issue as to why we haven't seen adoption, or we've hit a saturation point with people coming into the space purely because of the ownership aspect or the democratization or what the tech enables. So the use case you gave 100%, but it's finding PMF or finding solutions in Web 2 versus trying to sell it to users in Web 3.
So when we're designing our tokens, is there ever a limit of the number of utilities that we can apply to the token? And the second question could be, what is the impact on the token distributions when we increase the number of utilities?
So it's you can have an infinite amount of utilities, but in reality, how many are actually going to be used? And what we try and do is actually minimize the number of utilities in the beginning, because what you've seen, again, given the space is quite speculator driven, people don't care about the utilities. And when we speak about like me giving up my medical records, that's a great utility. But in reality, that's one utility that's enough, if that makes sense. And then you can bake in more utilities. We also spoke about a token economy being dynamic and iterating over time. So it might be the case that we found product market fit over something specific, over a specific set of utilities. But as things evolve over time, as the community and the ecosystem grows, as the product grows as well, that the product changes and you start introducing new utilities coming in. And so what was the second part of the question?
If you were to increase the number of utilities, how would that impact like the token distribution?
Absolutely. So coming back to a fixed number of tokens, some projects will say burn tokens, so the price can increase. That's very short-term thinking, and it's also debatable if it's a security or not, because you're decreasing the amount of something finite, which in theory increases the value of that. So having this idea where if tokens are being used and there's a fee and those tokens go back into the treasury, gives you more dry powder for you to be able to, or more tokens for you to be able to distribute again. The other aspect is, if your token survives 2, 3, 4 years, and there's a big ecosystem around it, and that token economy doesn't work, you can always migrate to a new token economy where it might be an unlimited supply, or it's dynamic, where there is minting and burning happening over time. It's more the case of crossing that initial chasm, so to speak. And then once you've crossed that, you can change the tokenomics moving forward. So it's if we try to solve for everything now, it's impossible. And I think that's a big mental framework we have to overcome, or we have to have that. I need to fail fast, but I also need to understand that what I've designed today isn't going to be the way the token economy looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now. But making sure that there's that initial attention and then retention around the token, so the token can have longevity over time. And then as the product grows, as the community grows, the user base grows, then we can look at baking in new utilities and even changing the tokenomics as well.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Any follow-ups or?
No, I guess like that's the interesting part. As it changes, as economy changes, every like 2 or 3 years, like an application might decide to change the utilities. And I always thought that would impact like the redistribution. But then I think you said that most cases utilities don't really matter.
I mean, they haven't mattered in the space so far.
Oh,
Unless
yeah.
you're, I mean, in general, utility, like projects will launch with a host of utilities, but how many of them are actually being used for that utility? Not many.
Not many, yeah.
Not many. And this isn't, I wish it wasn't the case. This is my biggest frustration. I wish it wasn't the case, because then it becomes very difficult for there to be genuine growth. Because people just want, again, shiny thing, where can I make my ROI? Okay, I've made some ROI here. Or maybe I haven't, but I'm going to dump because I might be 50% down, but I can make my money back somewhere else. Versus, I believe in this ecosystem. I believe in the utility, or there's an underlying product there. If it's my medical data, if it's, again, it could be anything. I mean, we've got a little Street Fighter game here. it might even be playing that. And then
Yeah.
for every game, it costs a token. And if 2 people are playing, it's wagering, and then 5% of that goes into a pot, and then there's a big prize pool at the end of it. That's a utility within itself. Well, maybe that is more in kind with where we're at because of the ROI element. That I get to play and win now, but I know at the end of the season there are more rewards because we've been able to pull these rewards over time versus genuine utility.
Yeah, but I guess that's where, if it's a utility for like movement of funds or performing like DeFi actions, then I'd imagine that have a huge impact in terms of allocations and whatnot.
The DeFi aspect is super interesting because that's where we tend to see what I call like the standard type staking as well, or providing liquidity. But there's also the standard downside that comes up, like impermanent loss if I'm locked up for a long period of time, or we speak about Curve Finance, and I really like Curve Finance in terms of the way they've iterated and grown with the bribing, because the idea of DeFi is to grow my underlying stack outright. But if I'm playing a game, if it's health, if it's something else, the use case of the token, the use case of the product isn't for it to 100x per se. So I feel that's a good differentiation actually.
Okay, cool.
Between both.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, good insight. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you as well. Let's go.
So yeah, I think we figured that it's it's hard to think of a solid utility, right? And you said that the general community just doesn't care too much about the utility.
It's easy to think of a utility. It's hard to find people who use a token for the way it's been designed.
Okay, so understanding that, how would you market a token? How would you, because you want to grow the community, you want to motivate people to buy your token. What is the key aspect that you think motivates someone to buy into your ecosystem?
So this notion of Web 2.5 for me doesn't exist, or it does exist, but the overlap between, if it's a Venn diagram between Web 3 and Web 2 is very small, because you're either Web 3 native or you're not. There's very few people that live in that overlap between both. So which then means, or you have 2 different product streams or 2 different product lines. Your product in Web 3 is a token. A token is a product within itself, so it needs its different product suites. And we spoke about Mochaverse as an example. But what's the intended impact of the product that the token is powering, if that makes sense? And that might be aimed, like if it's an exchange, then yes, it makes sense for it to be aimed at Web 3. But if it's medical records, if it's something else, then you try and find product market fit, in my opinion, in Web 2, because that's where the user base comes in. And that's where the user base comes in, and they're not focused on token price. Therefore, again, if I'm using Instagram, I'm using Instagram. Why? Because of the tool set that Instagram has. But also, coming back to network effects and critical mass, all of my friends are on Instagram. All of my friends are on Snapchat. All of my friends are on these different social media sites, or are on these different games. So I'm going to be there as well, because I know if I'm playing FIFA, like why did Pro Evo die, for example, for those who play football? Pro Evo died because people stopped buying Pro Evo because most people were playing FIFA. So they didn't have market share. So it's finding that product market fit, growing the community, or in this case, it's growing the end user, because we're speaking from a traditional Web 2 sense. And then people can learn about the token in time. If I'm doing whatever it is that needs to be done on the Web 2 side of things, and I'm earning these assets or these in-game currencies or whatever we want to call it, or it might even be an NFT that's a back end is an NFT, but on the front end might be a voucher, might be an achievement. but all of a sudden there might be a car in a game or a player in FIFA or something like that. And I realized, wait, this is worth $10,000. How? Why? Then I'm going to learn. Then I have the motivation to go and learn about what the underlying assets and what crypto and blockchain and Web3 means, versus, oh, you want to take part in this to make some money? You have to go on an exchange. You have to KYC. You then have to open up a custodial wallet or a non-custodial wallet, sorry. And then I need to save my seed phrase. And then I need to send something from the exchange to the wallet. And then I need to it's ridiculous. Who's gonna want to go through that just to take part in a decentralized Instagram or a decentralized Facebook? No one, or very, very few people. So I feel it's finding product, depending on what the underlying product is, finding product market fit, either in Web 2 or Web 3. Hyperliquid's a great example where they found product market fit. Again, in Web 3, it's a DEX that gives you a SEX-like experience, SEX being centralized exchange. I can see a few comments right now. But no, all jokes aside. And then they did their token airdrop. But because they'd found product market fit already, it was very clear where the utility for the token was. And that's why the Hyperliquid token went from like under $2 to $25, $30, because there was inherent utility in the token that was preceded by PMF. Like that's okay in Web3, but again, those products tend to revolve around monetization versus experiences. So maybe it's finding PMF in a Web 2 product. And I feel that's super interesting because we're at a point now where maybe 3 years ago, we didn't have the technology to do that with account abstraction. I mean, we had the Pectra upgrade in Ethereum. I think we had, was it 7702 as an upgrade? I know it's a Solana one, but I thought this is important for Ethereum where you can batch transactions and it is costing a fraction of a cent versus having to sign multiple transactions. Things like that become super interesting. And it's how can you obfuscate away all of the back end and just keep it a very seamless front end 100%. Experience.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
Well, can we get a nice round of applause from Mo?
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being able to join us.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you for everyone for being able to watch.
Thank you, guys. I hope you found it beneficial.
There we go.
If you didn't, shame.
Awesome. Oh, the last thing I would say while I have everyone's attention as well. So we do have the Ring doorbell over there. So I don't know if you've seen this. So essentially you can go and pitch up and share like what you've learned so far, like what you've been building today. Jack's going to be getting all that content, creating little snippets around it. So we'll get you some exposure about what you're doing. The hope is that you can do it multiple days. And then we can have like a day 1, day 2, day 3. So it shows you a bit of progression afterwards. And then at the end, we'll stitch all of those together as well. So as you're going about your day, find your way back into the sanctuary, have a little press of the Ring doorbell. You've got 60 seconds to give that little update. We'll then snip it up into a nice little clip for you. And then that way it's a nice way to continue telling the story. You also do have your stamps as well that you can get. So your digital stamps, unlock your merch. So that's by the front where the merch is, or there's little stickers around. Just need to tap it, put in your email, and then there's a digital pass for you, or digital stamp card for you to be able to be collecting all of those. And then we'll be distributing out your merch as you collect those little stamps. There we go. Awesome.
Excellent.
Appreciate it, everyone.